This is Monica Perez here with our returning guest, friend of the show, Steve Poikonen of AM Wake Up, of Slow News Day, of Union of the Unwanted, and you even have a couple of other things going on. What newer or other podcasts I've heard you talk about?
I additionally to AM Wake Up and Slow News Day, and we're both, I think, fairly regulars
Regulars, yeah.
on Union of the Unwanted. I host a show called Blunt Force Wisdom with a couple of my friends from when I lived in Vegas. It's a complete departure from everything else that we talk about, and it's way too much fun. It's more fun than anyone should legally be allowed to have. And in some cases, it is an illegal level of fun. And then I just started being part of a debate show called Deliberating Dog-Faced Dudes. And for years, I always looked at internet debates as two idiots screaming at each other over the definition of a word until somebody rage quit. And this is not that. And it's actually debate done in the tradition of, trying to move somebody to a position. There's a prompt or a question, an affirmative and a negative side, and we go at it. And it's been, I've only done two so far. Very, very informative and highly entertaining. So I'm proud to be a part of that.
Do you know?
Oh yeah. No, I do a full, several days worth of debate prep each week and try to source as much information as possible, verify the information, and then bring that to the conversation. Yeah.
Well, you are. I'm not going to start whatever. But there's a vulgar expression I always, but I won't start blowing smoke up your ass until that's the not vulgar one. Finish. Also, I think you are the Saturday Night Anarchy is one of your, which I was just recently had the pleasure of enjoying. That's another one of your many endeavors.
I'm a part of that, and it's hosted on my networks, but that is
Right.
a TMP, the New Prisoners production, and Tom Cooper is the host of that show, and Tom does a fantastic job of just getting out of the way and letting the anarchy ensue.
I didn't know if you were there like every time, like Union of the Unwanted.
Frequently,
yeah. So, yes, but I am just constantly amazed at how much foundational knowledge you have, how quick your recall is. You have what I like to, I have pride of my own, but you're better than I am, both RAM and ROM. So you have a lot of memory to access, and you can do it quickly, and you can make connections, do the analysis. That's amazing to me, but also the fact that you can keep up not only on the actual news and crack the code, but all the side stream bullshit that I cannot to me, listening to a podcast is like an entertaining experience. When I walk the dog, whatever, that's what I want to do. But to keep up on the personalities and the weird little, or what we're going to talk about today in part a little bit is the Russian, the witting or unwitting Russian agents who are in big trouble for being a part of Tenet Media. And I mean, I guess I've heard of something, but I just cannot follow it all. Yet, I mean, I've never heard anyone throw a reference at you that you could not field, and usually with wit. So kudos to you for all of that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm going to go ahead and blush now. But
I think you've lost the capacity to blush over the years. You've been through too much. No. So oh my gosh, yeah, you've got your fans are here, which is great. So I recently listened to you on tinfoil hats. Somebody's saying that the Rumble is crashing. I should tell my guy. So I recently heard you on tinfoil hats talking about controlled opportunists, which I love that expression. I did a little control alt media, which Billy Ray Valentine picked up on. And this is not, if you want to hear that show, it's episode 766 on tinfoil hats, and it's a great show. And I don't like to reproduce shows that have already happened. So I've done a lot of, thinking, and I want to make it conversational. So if that's not what you're up for, I don't know what to tell you. We're going to take comments towards the end, so you can write whatever questions you have for Steve. But and since that episode, there was this weird thing about whatever the supposed alternative media supporting Russian narratives on purpose or not on purpose. Pavel Durov getting detained in France for 96 hours. I I just my default state for basically every person and story that I hear of just across my screen, whether it's alt media, side stream, mainstream, any of I'm like, "Okay, this is probably fake or it's here for a reason." And the only times that I'm really wrong is when I take it at face value. So, I see that those people getting hauled away or getting highlighted, and I think, "Well, that certainly validates them." And, it goes from there. So, you have better truth dar, I think, than I do. So, why don't you just tell me about how, the basically controlled opportunists compared to controlled opposition, but there's also useful idiots, and there are also, there's just, and there are also real people who are just wrong, and
Mhm.
people who are right, but you just you can't distinguish, you can't discern because there's so much noise. They have flooded the zone, as they say themselves.
Absolutely. Yes, they have. And that's been a direct weaponization of the various mechanisms by which people get their information. I think that we're living in a point, and I've said this for years, but the true objective of anybody who is approaching this space legitimately is in conjunction with combating the rewriting of history. Our job is to combat the rewriting of real time, and we are faced with immediate rewrites of real time all over the space. And it doesn't just happen from the mainstream media, it happens from the mainstream alternative media or new narrative network, or Dr. Shiva calls it the not so obvious establishment. All of these things are accurate descriptors of what's going on. um, but if we're honest with ourselves, and we're honest with our audience, we've got a much better chance of communicating accurate information, regardless of whether or not we're 100% right. Like, I got issues with a couple of people in general. But the one thing that I've always loved about Owen Benjamin is his mantra: I might be wrong, but I'm not lying.
And you
Okay,
believe that.
and I can rock with that. That's
But do you
something.
believe him? I
Do
don't see, I've never heard him once. I've heard of him, and I know,
do I
whatever,
believe
live
I
with
I
somebody who
think
likes him,
that I think that Owen treads a fine line, but I do think that the majority of the time he believes what he's saying.
right.
I
So, and
do, and
I
I've
don't
got
hold
a
it
couple
against
of particular insights on this, because one of my good friend, a guy that I lived on the property for several months, it was advising Owen on off-grid farming and stuff like, the generator repair, or this is what you grow next to this in order to make both of the crops thrive, and that kind of thing. So I've been in the room when Owen's been on the phone, and have taken part in a couple of those conversations. I don't think he's out there deliberately pushing BS. I really
right.
don't. I think he truly believes at least 99% of what he says, and the 1% that he doesn't believe is there for comedic value.
Yes, there's that, and I also do not hold against anyone trying to make a buck. I actually trust that more. If you see the mechanism by which they are just trying to do, say, podcasting or whatever full time, and that's how they have to do it. Maybe they're a little salesy or whatever. That actually doesn't bother me. It's when I'm sure they're not actually working to pay the bills, and they're still doing it full time. I'm thinking, well, who's paying the bills? But
Yeah.
there's also, and this is a real, uh, matter of discernment. That's a difficult one. I you see somebody like Rand Paul who and I'm just like, this is a flashback to when libertarianism was something that like our entire community was that it was libertarian centric. Now it's post libertarian centric, which I also want to talk to you about. But he would do things that his father would never do, and I I could forgive that kind of thing. Or let's just take Ron Paul himself. He didn't get up on the floor. He didn't Cynthia McKinney himself. He didn't get up there and say, 9/11 was an inside job and I know who did it and whatever. He lived to fight another day. And I had a conservative, I wasn't a conservative radio show, but I was on a conservative station. I was like, I'm definitely not talking about 9/11. It's not going to work. And when I did talk about it, I was frog marched out of there a month later after 8.5 years. Now, I said a few things that I kind of let my hair down. Big mistake, but I think it was probably mostly COVID. But regardless, you lose your platform if or you lose your audience but when do you know and does it matter? Like how do you think about all the different possibilities and how to deal with it? How to proceed with caution in that terrain?
Well, I've gone the completely different route. So I don't know how to navigate those spaces. I don't. I've never been allowed into them. I'm never going to be allowed into them from the moment that I started my show.
No, but even
Uh,
here, I'm talking about in our space, you and I have shared screens with feds for sure.
oh yeah, without a
Yeah.
doubt. And I mean, I think my second union of the unwanted, I chased away Roger Stone.
Yeah,
Um,
I've chased away I can think of 2 people who were just like, "I gotta get out of here." I'm like, "Yeah,
yeah.
probably."
It,
Yeah,
I mean,
so yes, so you don't know how to navigate it, you've thought of a different way, but you
it's
have
the
to
only
a
way
little
I
bit.
know how to
Yeah.
go. The only way I know how to go is a direct appeal to audience for the financial vehicle for the show, and the No Agenda podcast with Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak pioneered a concept called value for
Yeah,
value.
mhm.
And so that's the way that the show runs. If you see value in what we're doing, whatever it looks like, however much it looks like to you, then yeah, send that, contribute it. If that means books, if I need to read something, send
Yeah.
me that book. If if you have more, cash in your pocket than you do time to talk to people about it or share the show or any of that stuff, then send that. But that's how the show runs. I'm never going to have advertising. I'm never going to have paid sponsorships. It's not going to happen. You're not never once going to hear 10 minutes of ad reads, opening the show. There nothing is ever going to appear behind a paywall, and that's just the way that it's going to work. And I am considering myself very, very blessed and very, very fortunate that the audience has picked up on that, responded to it, and I can work full time at this. Is why I have, as many shows as I do, because I feel like what I'm getting from the people who watch the show deserves that amount of dedication and time to put out various different forms of what I consider to be both truth and also art.
So what when you're delivering truth, what are the parameters? And the question is this. So you have to tell them what you think is true. Do you have to screen guests for fedness, for controlled opportunism, for controlled opposition? So you have a lot of shows, you have a lot of time on the air, you have a lot of guests. Do you feel and we go on the Union of the Unwanted, and sometimes
Mhm.
that people pop up that I'm like, what question am I gonna get reveal what this person's real story is, but not be rude because I think it's totally rude. I've had people ask me, "Oh, will you interview this guy?" Sure, I'll bring him on. 5 seconds into it, I'm like, "Oh, uh, I'm never rude. I'm never gonna call them out." But do you owe your listeners discerning that kind of thing for them? Like, how do you handle that problem in our world?
So, I teach the, like, brown belt class, sometimes the black belt class. You know what I mean? And so we have an advanced belt class audience, and the audience can suss out these people and me, and they have the actual time on their hands to go do deep background
Yes.
dives on them, and then they'll be posting it in the chat in real time. So I heavily rely on the people that support the show and are part of the show to, to help me with that.
Producers.
Um, yeah, they are. They are literally the producers of the show. I also have a great BS detector.
Yes, that's so important.
And that's been finely honed over, my 46 years of life through various very wild circumstances. And I have uh an interesting background that I don't even, that we can get into a little bit, but I've gone a lot of places, I've done a lot of things, I've lived through a lot of stuff, and I've come out on the other side of it, fairly healthy, hale, and fit. So that's given me the opportunity to have a lot of the blinders removed and to be able to see things, I think, a little bit more clearly, a little bit more early than a lot of people.
Well, I do actually wanna hear about your a little more about your backstory and that, that intellectual journey. I listened twice to the Controlled Opportunists tinfoil hat, so, and it made me laugh when Sam said that his father always told him not to believe anything. I had the exact same experience. My father and we grew up too not crazy far from each other, upstate New York, whatever. But
Mhm.
so I don't know if it was a cultural like bullshit dar thing going on there. But yeah, I was just raised to be what I think my father would call a classical liberal, and it seemed like a libertarian for a while, and then he went back to just being whatever traditional conservative, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, like he was warning me from the beginning about the UN and everything. So I was ready for all of that. And when I when I started on the radio, which was like 2011 or 2012, right around the Ron Paul thing, I was amazed at how many callers were like, thank goodness nobody ever talks about the Bill of Rights. Nobody talks about any of these fundamentals, but they knew them because they were raised on them. So whatever I was there with that, which is a more traditional thing. And it took me till 2013 until the Boston Marathon bombing to realize that 9/11 was an inside job. So that that I just didn't believe they would do it. And then when I saw the Boston Marathon bombing, I was like, "Oh, they would do it. So I guess they did do it." And then like that was it. But I assume you were before, you figured that out long before that. But like where'd you even come from? Like you know, were you taught to be a libertarian in the cradle or what?
I, I would.
What's your journey?
So, my dad was a pretty middle of the road conservative. And in fact, his dad wrote Ronald Reagan when Reagan was in the hospital and got a letter back. Um, yeah,
Wow.
which
That's
was
pretty cool.
framed on the wall in my house
Yeah,
when I
that's
was growing up.
awesome. Yeah.
He, but my dad also, both of my parents taught high school before I was born. They met, on the pathway to become educators. My mom was a university professor for a number of years until she retired. When I came around, they moved to the town that I effectively grew up in because my grandparents were there, my aunt was there, my uncles were in and out fairly frequently, and they wanted to make sure that they were raising kids around extended family. That was very important to them. Um, and so he took a job at managing a sales team. But when I was growing up, it was conservative talk radio in the car, and that kind of thing. And I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh, whether I wanted to or not. Um, and Then, then when I was 11 years old, I got introduced to my half brother. My half brother was a number of years older than me, and he told
A
my parents.
surprise brother?
Well, I mean, yeah, knew, but just never met.
Okay,
You
you
know,
knew
it
he
was yeah,
existed.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't
Just
like he
hadn't.
showed up with a
Yeah,
picture of your dad and his mom, and you're like,
right. No, 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 no. Knew he existed,
Yes,
but
yes.
hadn't actually met. And he said, "I'm gonna take Steve camping for spring break." And he was 9 years older than me. You know, I was 11. They were like, "Okay, great." So we
Were
went
you
to.
did you grow up in Colorado?
I grew up in Indiana.
Oh, Indiana, right. I knew
Yeah, yeah,
Colorado
yeah. I lived in
was a later
Colorado for a
thing. Yeah,
number of years.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I knew that was later. Okay,
Uh,
Indiana, interesting, okay.
yeah. In fact, the town that I grew up in, Indiana, Chris Hedges highlights in America the Farewell Tour as the prime example of what NAFTA did to America.
Wow.
It was a GM town. It's
So close to
Anderson, Indiana. Heavily factory oriented. Yeah, a ton of people that I grew up with. Everybody's dad worked for GM. They all had a lake house. You know, we didn't have a lake house.
right.
But they, and then NAFTA happened in 94, and the
Wow.
town has gone significantly downhill ever since. It's like a racetrack, strip mall churches, and crack dens, and that's about what it is. It's
And then,
also
of
the.
course, that'll generate the immigration problem because you don't have any people who can do anything anymore. But sorry, what were you saying?
Well, it's also the district that Mike Pence represented before he became governor of Indiana, and then once he became a U.S. state
Yeah.
representative, and I don't know if it's correlative or not, but the town really started to go downhill.
Hmm.
Um, but my brother goes, "Let's go camping," and we went to Alpine Valley, Wisconsin, to a Grateful Dead show.
Ha! Nice.
Where at 11 years old, I took 4 hits of acid for the first time.
What? That
Yeah.
is not okay.
You're correct. You're correct. And then for the next couple of years, they kinda guinea pigged me a little bit,
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 9, so
yeah. And then in 1994, I was given a copy of Behold a Pale Horse, by William Cooper, and
During the 4 trips of acid? No, that was
and
94
it
was
was,
l
yeah,
later.
a couple years later.
Yeah.
And I was, my entire high school career, I was listening to Coast AM with Art Bell.
Nice.
And so I was ruined before I ever graduated.
Got it.
And I've really never fully put 2 feet into society. Had under the table carpentry gigs. I traveled around the country and did Renaissance festivals for about 5 years. Um, the Renaissance Festival community is, I think at this point, the largest group of quote unquote organized homeless in America.
Travelers, they're like
Yeah.
hippies. And you
Yeah.
were a carpenter with them?
With them, and then, in various different spots all over the country.
Oh, very noble profession.
But it's great to have a foundational skill set, especially if, all of this goes bad. I can go pick up a hammer every day of the week.
Yeah, it is. That actually is the worst thing about NAFTA, I think, is that we can't do anything.
Yeah.
Nobody knows how to do anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of skill sets that have been lost or limited or now only available to immigrants
Right. Who
because,
don't speak English. I mean,
yeah,
you're never gonna learn, and these are heirloom or heritage things like preserving food and growing food, and I mean, it's a lifetime of nuance that you just can't learn from a book or from even as an apprentice, as an adult. It's like if you girls should learn them at their mother's knees, and boys, I mean, all of my brothers can weld, drive trucks, like, they can do all the manly arts, they can't grow stuff because my father left his father's farm,
mhm,
but, yeah, I mean, it takes a lifetime to be masterful at that stuff, and that's what you need to be.
it really does. And so, I mean, because of that, I never really fully assimilated into, mainstream society. I wrote a lot back in the day, back during the 2008 presidential election. Yes, I can.
Yeah, he can.
100%.
Burning Beard wants to say, can he make a wooden sword? And yes, he can.
Absolutely, absolutely, and fight with one.
Can I
Um,
actually commission you to make me one? Because my son with Down syndrome is dying for a sword, and I literally ask me every day, I'm like, "Cannot give you a sword, but I could give maybe a wooden sword."
yeah,
And
although
your
they
friend needs to
really,
make me a
really hurt.
chainmail miniskirt.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, but what's her name? You have a friend who can make me a
So
chainmail
I've got a
miniskirt.
couple of different friends that can make you chainmail miniskirts. Yeah, no, my friend Shannon that I worked with for years at the Renaissance was chainmail master. She also makes musical instruments. And she made an upright bass that had a step stool on it because she's 5 foot nothing.
Ha! That's excellent. Wow, and she could play it? That's crazy.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a hard thing to play people quick because it hurts their fingers.
It really does. But yeah, no, I would be happy to make your kid a wooden sword. I would. It's gonna
Awesome.
hurt when you get whacked in the shin with it, though.
I just don't wanna wake up to, like, a tragic scene. That's all. If there's no I don't mind if he breaks a light bulb, but I just can't have him
Yeah,
having a sword.
yeah. Very hard to spill blood with a wooden sword.
So
You
yes,
gotta
that's all I
really
need
try.
to know. That's all I need to know. So that's interesting. So you never, yeah, entered the mainstream, which I respect, and I do come from a long line of like not it's not as interesting a path, but high school dropouts and my family, my older brothers and sisters, they just, I don't know if it was because my father had such an anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment attitude that he just didn't instill in us any respect. I dropped out of high school actually, and I went to community college, and then I was like, "Fuck this!
Mhm.
I'm taking some standardized tests, and I am getting a job that is easier than uh, 6 nights a week waitressing." However, the job wasn't easier. I became an investment banker. That was like a horrible job, and eventually I got to the point where it's like, "Hey," I said to my husband after we were married, like, "Let's just step off the grid. Like, we're never catching up. This thing has been a scam." And he said, "But I've come so far." And I'm looking at, like, we just paid off our school loans. We bought a house, had a huge mortgage. There was a housing crash, so we lost our entire down payment. We were lived too close to the city because we had to work so hard that we couldn't send our kids to public school. And I was like, "No, no, no. You haven't even begun. Like, this is going to be a nightmare until you're too old to work." So stepping onto the grid, which was a choice I made, yes, I probably uh uh, I can live in, not that I love it, but I could live in LA and we can pay the
Yeah,
bills and stuff, but you don't have to. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, you don't even have to. You don't have to live anywhere where you need to get filthy lucre if you just have chickens and potatoes.
it's
But
true.
anyway, so yes, so you did not take that path yet. So how did you, and tell me whatever else you want about that story, but I also want to understand how you honed your ability to think very critically and in an organized way and research and all of that, because what you're talking about is a way to see things from a different perspective, not fall for bullshit, but there's also something about influence and persuasion that's a higher level, like in the trivium, like that's the thing that they've cut out of public school. So was that at the knee of your traveler friends or your dad or yourself or what?
So my grandparents were missionaries, and my grandfather was a very, very, very eloquent pastor. And when I turned, I don't know, I think maybe 12, he gave me as many religious texts from as many different theologies and types of religion as possible. Like in conjunction with a non-Schofield Bible, he gave me the Bhagavad Gita, gave me a bunch of Buddhist
Wow.
texts, he gave me the copy of the Quran, and he said, I need you to find the common threads. Okay. So look through all of it and find the common threads because that's what's truly going to count at the end of it. So I was challenged very, very seriously and fairly early. And I would credit Hollis Pistol. It was weird. He was a pistol.
Wow.
Yeah. With like forcing me to develop pattern recognition and then also to think critically about things in a way that I hadn't ever been exposed to or used to. And I have tried to do him proud in that regard ever since.
Wow. I mean, that really, really answers my question and other questions too. And I'll just say, like, when I see smart chicks, like,
Mhm.
sorry, I turned my fan on, all my papers
Oh,
on.
I need to turn my fan on if
You want
that's
a minute?
okay. Yeah, well, I got it. Sorry about the sweatshirt there, folks.
Oh, I didn't even see it. Well, it's your wait.
Yeah, no, I just,
Got
mushed
it.
in
Oh,
front of
sorry.
the
Yeah.
camera.
Mhm. So yeah, so when I see smart chicks on the news or whatever, news anchors or like on Fox going back and forth, or good looking chicks, like they shouldn't have wasted their time getting smart. Like, what's this chick's backstory? Or even like a silver tongued radio host on a guy, whatever. And 9 out of 10 times they're lawyers, litigators specifically. So they've really been trained to think critically and argue persuasively in a conflict situation. So as soon as I hear that, I'm like, oh, okay, I believe that is this person, and she doesn't have like a thing in her ear. I know it's a little sexist of me, but it's like my husband's like, guitar players are ugly because the good looking guys are chasing, tail, and the guitar players are sitting home with nothing to do. So they're doing it.
Yeah.
And then you say what you have to say, and then I'm going to tell you why you leveled that up for me.
No, that's highly accurate. It really is. You're hard pressed to find a smoking hot guitar player, or someone who doesn't have extensive debate, public speaking, or legal training that's going to be able to elucidate those arguments in a way that resonates.
And my son, every once in a while, he'll show me a picture of some like gorgeous young woman, gorgeous, doing like pretzel type acrobatics, or like, she shows you this thing. And we're always looking at just like behind the Iron Curtain. This is definitely somebody from, a shithole country or something. Like, this is somebody who you probably don't even see it anymore. It's probably something in the past 10 years because of TikTok, because you're so mesmerized that even the poor don't have to find things to occupy their time. But your circumstance, we're just too rich to hone our skills. But I will say, I hadn't thought of it. It draws a connection, because when I was in law school in the beginning, I didn't do well. It was the first time I ever really didn't do well in school, and I just couldn't figure it out. And I just didn't understand what it took to do well in law school. And I had a friend who was Jewish, and I was Catholic, and I would tell her, like, you can't do this, you can't do that. She's like, well, I don't know. I would tell her the rules. I said, all the rules. All of those rules. That's what law is. All you need to do is understand that it's a system of laws, just like you have already learned. So when you're telling me that that's what it was your grandfather did for you, he would be highly motivated to do it, because it's really important to a religious person. That's your purpose in life, is to make sure, especially, that you save your descendants, I think, if not yourself.
Yeah.
And then when he keeps there's also that heirloom discipline, that structure, that analytical thinking that does get passed down, that people will, even poor farmers, they will take the time. In Catholics before Vatican II had to learn Latin, and what access you had to important legal texts as well as religious texts from that. And it so what you're telling me you learned, first of all, there was a discipline to it. There was discernment in it, and the fact that it was comparative, you can really distill out the most important fundamental universal values. And then there was also a lot of knowledge and principles in those texts, real knowledge, like historical knowledge or even metaphorical knowledge. So
Well, and also allegory.
Yes.
And allegory is a vehicle for communicating a foundational message
Across the ages.
And so that's something that, but my mom was an English professor. I got, how to construct sentences and stuff like that literally beaten into me. I thought my mom had stock in the wooden spoon company. I did. But so yeah, I mean, I just somebody in the chat was saying this. They popped into AM Wake Up one day when we were talking about the GATE program. I was a GATE program kid. Accelerated learning program, stuff like that. Gifted and talented education is what GATE stands for, which seems to be a large scale, almost MK Ultra esque event. Um, I have very few memories of what we actually did. I remember being
What
taken to
age? Well,
elementary school.
because the Center for Talented Youth, the Johns Hopkins thing, is where Lady Gaga,
Mhm.
Zuckerberg, the Quora guy, Sergey Brin. I mean, and they weren't there to teach the kids; they were there to study the kids. People don't
Yes.
realize that.
Yeah. So windowless rooms, lots of time with headphones and various different sounds and
Really?
frequencies being put into us. And um, looking back on it, it seems like it was designed to make people go one of two ways. And one way was into the state, and the other way was a fringe character that everyone would look at and be like, oh, you're a crazy person.
Ted.
We don't need to listen to you.
Yeah, Uncle Ted. They must have gotten inspired when the Uncle Ted experiment went the way it did.
Right? Uh, but I
And
don't know.
that's around when you went on that quadruple trip, that's terrible. I can't believe you survived that with your psyche intact. Or did you?
Oh, I don't know if I did,
Yeah,
man.
I'm not
I
sure.
don't know if I did. But it may have helped my recall. I don't know.
Something. It did something. It blew out. It's like when you get a new car and you have to just take it to 120 on the highway. Like
Yeah,
maybe you blew out the schmutz.
maybe. Bill Hicks referred to it as taking a squeegee to your third eye.
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
understand. Well, but you think clearly in a linear fashion. I'm sure you don't like to hear that, but I like that. And you can function. So I mean, that's to me when I see how I know that there is truth, objective truth, because we build skyscrapers that are plumb all the way down. You know what I mean? Like anything like that, level and plumb to me are reasons to believe in objective truth. So you're being able to think and communicate, obviously, did not do any long-term damage. It might have done some good. But so I understand that, but there's a big space of time between that of academic intellectual development on your part
Hmm.
and your uh I would, am I wrong to say that you've dedicated your life now to applying that to the world? Maybe how long have you been are you exclusively support yourself through podcasting and other media? Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for
And
how
it's
long, when did that start?
so it was 2021 when I started doing it full time. I started doing podcasting in 2018. And I was still doing, remodels and carpentry and stuff like that. And then I had to take a second job for a little bit because it got like that. And then I was doing, in conjunction with that, more or less full-time free speech activism around the removal of Julian Assange from the UK embassy. We were doing a lot of work about that. And then the Rona happened. Um, and I was still working both jobs throughout 2020. But I have my original background as far as this stuff goes is in writing. I was very, very, very briefly employed by The Nation magazine in 2008.
Oh, The Nation. I remember the liberal guy from the Point Counterpoint, right? Wasn't that where he was? He was
Uh-huh.
very smart. Yeah, he was a smart guy.
And the dude who ultimately fired me was Chris Hedges because he was the political editor of The Nation at that time. And I wrote that everything that I've ever done has been scrubbed, blacklisted, put to the depths in the very bottom of the internet because I wrote an article called Barack Obama, Reagan with a Tan. And
Wait, how soon was that? Was it too soon?
it was way too soon. It was 2008. I think it was May of 2008. It was right after I think one of the last primary debates that they had held. And he had made this whole big statement about how, like, hey, look, I'm basically Ronald Reagan. you know, and that, and so I wrote about it, and they were like, no, you can't say that here. And then I found out that every other outlet that I tried to apply to, because
Yeah.
this is still the very early age of, blogging or
Yeah.
internet culture being part of the news cycle. And
Very,
prior to that,
very. Yeah, very
it was,
way early. I mean, to the point where it was, really impenetrable still,
yeah.
I would say.
And so it became impenetrable for me as a result of that. And then I just kind of, I put my head back down. I had a very young son at the time. And so it was much, much more of a necessity to make sure that he was taken care of, began because the writing thing was still kind of a lark.
But why even do that? Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at what you're saying was up. You had 2 jobs. Now you're telling me you had a baby. I assume that, I mean, maybe I shouldn't assume, but I'm guessing maybe THC was part of the mix, which I consider to be
Sure.
like demotivating in my life. But and you're doing activism for Assange. Was this a chick-driven event, or like that seems, I would never go that far. I would
No,
never spread myself that thin.
I have a ridiculous supply of energy,
Wow.
Monica. I don't know
I do not.
where it comes from or why. I mean, right now I'm doing, I'm basically working like 18 hours a day.
Yes, yes,
And
yes. Oh, well, that would explain, because that's what I was saying from the beginning. Like, how do you keep up on everything? If you don't need a lot of sleep and you can maintain your attention span for very long stretches, I could see how it is physically possible for you to keep up on all that stuff. But wow.
yeah, no, I really, I don't know what to credit it to, but I guess when I was growing up, I was always involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, and I
Mhm.
had a bunch of other,
Yeah.
you know, I had my first job when I was 9. And I
I mean,
told,
that part I get. I mean, me too. I always had jobs, but my parents were blue collar. So we didn't, I mean, they wouldn't even drive me to stuff. I couldn't do anything or play anything. I didn't have the extracurriculars. Your mother was a teacher, and Tripoli said the same. Both of his parents were teachers. And I think you said both of your parents were teachers, right?
yeah, when they met, they were. My dad quit teaching to take a job managing salespeople because it paid more and it was gonna,
Right, right. He was
provide a
also,
better,
yeah,
yeah.
but they can, and this is why I think generationally or immigrants or whatever, uh there is an maybe almost imperceptible advantage in having been just raised by people who were maybe college educated or understood education or the value of education, whereas I was really discouraged from doing it. Not that this is about me, I'm not trying to do that, but I'm trying to understand you, because I relate to you in many, with like your perspectives and all of that, but I just cannot like fit together the pieces of what, you're like one of my brothers,
Oh.
but like functional. Which, like to me, I've been making excuses for everybody. And I'm like, this guy's doing it. But I will say, both with the writing and with the activism, if you are, a three-dimensional person, and you have the energy and the clarity of thought, and you're not burdened with maybe like true addiction or depression or anything like that, you're going to want to have outlets, especially if you have a blue collar job. When you're educated, you're going to want to find a place. A creative outlet's important. And if the world is going to shit and you got a little baby, yeah, that's actually when I started going marching against Obamacare and stuff. I said, you know what, I cannot sit on the couch and tell my kids when it's all gone to hell that I just was too busy. I just can't. So
Well,
I
and
am beginning to understand.
I tried being a drunk. I tried being an addict, and it didn't work. It wasn't doing it for me,
Yeah.
and so I was able to get through both of those things at a couple of various different stages of my life. Um, Died a couple of times.
Oh,
Uh,
come on. Seriously? Were you
yeah,
that into the
yeah.
drugs
In
and everything?
the late '90s, they were giving out heroin like Tide samples.
I lost 2 siblings to heroin.
And so that was when I was doing, yeah, basically I was, sustaining myself in various concert parking lots through extra legal methods. And it funded my ability to travel. But I was technically homeless. I lived in hotel rooms, or
Yeah. Oh,
we'd
that's
get
homeless.
a
You know,
rental place for a couple of months or something like that, and burn
homeless
through it.
homeless kids don't have if you have no permanent address, you are exempt from the vaccine mandate, I think, in Massachusetts, if not the whole country. So, I
Oh
know
wow.
I was looking into that. The definition of homeless is no permanent address.
So I went to enrolled in Purdue University in 1996, and went to a couple of classes a couple of times, and then went, no, it's way more fun to travel.
Yeah.
So I did that, and what I was doing in those parking lots allowed for me to travel internationally. So I did that up until 9/11 happened, and then went, oh, it's going to be a huge pain in the butt to travel internationally going forward. So I really haven't done much international travel since then. But I really tried to get to as many places as I possibly could. And along the way, through a series of bad decisions, you know,
Yes, I understand.
developed a heroin habit, and
Mm.
was able to kick that, because I got basically locked in a room in
Oh, yeah.
Chicago for 5 days,
The
where friends
vitamin
of mine were
sweats.
throwing packs of cigarettes and bottles of
Yeah.
water in, you
You need
know.
to throw sleepers. I've actually been around that a few times where you smell disgusting,
Yep.
the vitamin sweats,
Hmm.
and you need the sleepers. Somebody needs to slip you some Ambien under the door.
Yeah. And after about 5 days, I was like, hey, can we smoke a joint? They're like, yeah, dude, you could, yeah,
You're
yeah.
good.
So in multiple ways, multiple times, I've truly been saved.
Yeah. Mm.
And I can't, I'm going to be forever grateful to everyone who facilitated that in my existence, because I really shouldn't technically be here.
Yeah.
And so, um, it's that's one of those things, I think, that if you're able to come through it, and come through it with any sort of healing on the
Mhm.
outside of it, then it helps build a perspective that is a little bit more. And I'm always searching for a more complete picture of the world that we live in. I don't think I have it. I think I'm building towards it, but everything that I've done and been through has helped facilitate the process of forming a more complete picture of the world.
So we are a part of your journey, right? But
Hmm.
also, not just that, but I mean, you could probably, or could you not, slough I don't know, because, like, for me, I hate the news, and I hated always seeing politicians, and my mother would say I would literally have to leave the room for the State of the Union address. Even when I was little, my mother said, "You just can't stand the lion. You can't be in the same room as lion."
Hmm.
So I always hated the newspaper and everything, and actually it was really a big problem when I was a banker, and even on the radio, I was like, "I'm not reading it every day." But you have to be informed, and I just could hardly do it. It's very hard for me, but I think that's why I don't fall for it, and it's good to analyze it that way. But you do read everything. I mean, it seems honestly, I've never heard you misreference, and I'm wondering if that is part of you delivering valuable content because it's your livelihood, and you are giving the people what they want with integrity, or is that do you think that all of those details are necessary for your journey?
I I don't think that they're 100% necessary. I really don't. I think that in a lot of ways, I'm a definite glutton for punishment in that regard.
Yeah.
But I also grew up, reading all kinds of things. And so it's a passion. I love the feel of an actual book. There's nothing better. There's, very few scents on the planet that are more attractive to me than old book pages.
Yeah.
And it's something that, I really died. I'm dedicated to forming a more complete picture of the
Yeah.
world.
Okay.
So I'm gonna dive into stuff
Yeah.
that, especially if it's stuff that has been pushed out of the, your direct vision.
Yes.
And I've found more often than not, that truth is in the margins. Truth is contained not necessarily on stage, but off stage. And if you can sneak past the velvet rope and get backstage a
Yeah.
little bit, then you get a much better insight.
So let's talk about what then is, our place, your place, or not even our places in, and I hate this expression so much, and I don't know why it's in my head, but I have to say it, in our like ecosystem of, I guess it's alt media, controlled
Hmm.
alt media is most of it. And it's not quite, I think it's lower down the rung than side stream media, which would be, like Glenn Beck kind of thing, whatever. But there, what's going on? Like, and when I think in my mind's eye of what's happening, I feel like there is this just ever thickening, expanding morass of just more podcasters, more media personalities, more minutia, more like over analyzing. Like the 24-hour, I thought CNN was crazy when it was 24 hours of news. Now we have, like, if you think about it, it's billions of hours of news every day because of all the people that are contributing. And I personally think that most of that is just there to drown out, to flood, to confuse the few voices that might be telling you the truth. And that makes me think that the truth has value. But how do what do you think is the real purpose of all of that? And then tell us a little bit about what the differences between controlled opposition and controlled opportunists and useful idiots.
So rather than ecosystem, I would, and when I do talk about controlled opportunists, describe it as the media landscape. And if you are a traveler and you don't have a map, then you are going to have a very, very difficult time navigating the landscape that you're in. You may have a very difficult time even recognizing what populates that landscape. And I think that, yeah, because there really is a relatively small number of people who are here to kind of be the asshole that's like, here's how the magic trick's done, you know, or, oh, that guy's actually a dummy. That guy's actually a puppet.
Yeah.
In conjunction with the copy of Behold a Pale Horse in '94, it was also given like I grew up on George Carlin and Bill Hicks, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
later on Patrice
Carlin was good.
O'Neill, Norm Macdonald. All of these people were about boiling something down to its essence, allowing room for nuance and discussion around it, but dedicated to finding the truth of the issue, get to the heart of the matter, and then on top of that, attempting to have very real, very serious conversations about it. So I'm way more influenced by comics than
Mhm.
anybody else on the planet.
Yeah, maybe that's why they're destroying comedy.
Yeah, they did a good go at it, but I think comedy's on its way back up.
All right.
I do. I truly. It's very, it's still difficult for comics to get out there and plug some truth into it, but it happens. And if you're willing to look for it, or yeah,
Yeah,
especially if you're willing to travel a little bit for it, it's there.
but it's very siloed. So the people, and that was one thing about when I had a radio show that was really dangerous, was that it was just in your car when you were trying to listen to the news or traffic or weather or whatever, and it just crossed all the silos, everything, racial, economic, anybody in a car in Atlanta
Mhm.
that was the station they listened to. And it was so powerful that I can see now. And then people would call and argue with me, which was super powerful because you would get both, as you know from your debate show, that you would get both of the issues out there, and then people would have to think about it.
Mhm.
And so I think, yes, so I wouldn't be surprised if Big T, they deliberately destroyed comedy and then let it reemerge, but siloed, kind of like they destroyed radio, let it reemerge as podcasts. And I remember, I think it was Alfred McCoy who wrote Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. I
Mhm.
thought it was him who said that the publisher wouldn't let him publish it without sending it to the CIA first, and they told him what he had to take out, and they said, you can publish it in another book, you just can't publish it in this book. And The Power of the Silo, I was like, oh wow, wow. So
Well,
so there's, yes, I believe that's quite powerful, but it's nicer if you can reach across the aisle with that stuff.
absolutely, but the position that we find ourselves in, especially with algorithmic manipulation and deboosting and purposeful, not just siloing, is something that Julian Assange talked about, where he said, if we're not careful, the internet is going to become a filterverse of one, where everything is specifically target marketed
Oh
to you.
yeah.
Everything that you see, everything you ingest is designed specifically to elicit a very intentional emotional reaction from you. And I've had a contention for a number of years now, and I really do. Eventually, I'm going to get time to write the book about it. But I have a theory called manufacturing confusion that's built off of Ed Herman's book that Noam Chomsky gets credit
Ripped off,
for.
yeah.
Yeah. And in manufacturing consent, Ed Herman very, very clearly lays out the function of the mainstream media. And I firmly believe that if not before, as the ink was drying on the Patriot Act, the primary role of the mainstream media, and now certainly the mainstream alternative media, is to manufacture confusion. Because if you're confused, you're malleable, and you're more likely to be pushed into a fear state. And if you're in a fear state, the only thing you get to do is react in fight or flight. And that's a binary that keeps people arguing, distrustful of their neighbors, unwilling to participate in their community, and I guess beholden to not just the state, but all of the state's agents. And it's been 23 years since that happened, well, since 9/11 happened, and 21 years since the Patriot Act came into effect. That's a generation.
So I will say that the interim period, because I came up with an expression probably 10 years ago because of the radio, because I would get the phone calls of people getting mad at me because it was a conservative radio station and I was the one letting in Ron Paul calls. Like when you think about how close together we should have been and people would get irate at me, I would call it manufacturing advocacy. Because consent is one thing, but there were regular people screaming in my face, which is exactly what happened with the COVID thing. I mean, you could just see it happening, and they would police you. They would police you, and that's another thing about like the see something, say something, and I can't remember what that came up recently in the news. It was so it's so oppressive and so chilling. And it is a psychological operation of the highest order. And I think that what you're talking about is it's actually worse, because at least people are trying to advocate, we're forming ideas, but people who are really confused and cannot, I mean, that does go to what we're talking about, in that you cannot, it gets frustrating. You just cannot discern the truth anymore, to the point where, I mean, I thought I even like made it up, but it's Baudrillard. It's like nothing is even happening. It's like, oh my gosh. It's like, so I refuse to go into is this all a simulation, or this is my dream, is how we used to say it when I was young. I don't care about that, because I still feel pain. So I'm, I can't work for someone I can't quit. I will not be able to endure a loss of free association, which people never think about, but that's the worst one in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain I'm federally unemployable at this point, like by degree.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I apply for a job just for kicks, like in society, and never hear anything, just to see, because a good friend of mine is a fellow named Keith McHenry, who co-founded Food Not Bombs. I don't know if you're familiar with those guys or not.
I remember from way back when.
Yeah. Founded in, I think, 81, maybe 82. But Keith has been unemployable by federal mandate since 2002. If his social security number pops up on a payroll thing, that company immediately gets a phone call from the FBI and says you're employing a known terrorist, because Food Not Bombs was designated a terrorist organization in 1989 for feeding homeless people.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember the whole no nukes thing.
And I have some parity there with that, where there's a couple of places that I'm applied for that got a phone call, and then I got a phone call saying, hey, we can't hire you.
And what do you specifically attribute that to?
At this point, I would attribute it to the Assange activism.
Okay. Yeah.
Because we said a lot of stuff that nobody wanted to hear back in 2019. That was when I got demonetized from YouTube permanently.
Yeah.
And then never, I mean, I know we're on YouTube right now. I'm
not monetized.
Yeah, and I'm sorry because it might get messed with.
I take it down sometimes if it's going to get ugly. After 5 minutes, I just take it down.
Well,
I like to do it live because the streaming is so good, like off of StreamYard. So I like to do my YouTube. But if you just completely delete it, I haven't had any problems. But if you just make it private, I've gotten so close to like the third strike, and in 1 minute, like they'll take a bunch down at once, and you can't do anything about it.
And I'm not on a no-fly list yet, as far as I know, but I am
on a no-fly list once.
I am on the you go to the penalty box. You're randomly selected for additional screening every single time, and I've missed a bunch of flights and stuff like that. I had to reschedule.
That happened to me. Yes, for a long time. And if there's any way you can slightly change your name, add a middle name or something. I don't know.
Right. That might be a way around it.
That's what I did. I just went back to my maiden name. That was a major name change.
Okay.
So privately, I'm not Monica Perez. Like my family, my kids, like I'm Mrs. Perez to their friends, but officially, which is kind of weird because I travel with my son who has Down syndrome and he has a completely different name, and I don't look anything like him, and it gets a little, and whatever. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But so I have thought that people who are really in danger or are a danger, which is the same thing, they are charismatic leaders or people with firsthand information. So if you were getting traction, I would say you, in real life, you could be a danger. Whereas I'm so obviously controlled in the sense that if I've seen my YouTube like numbers, just videos like will tell people, please watch this video so I can see if the numbers keep going up, and they don't. So like that's why they want us all there, because and what I was going to say is you were saying about the idea of being in a universe of one. That was in an article, I'm sure after Assange said it, by one of the people who was on the ground floor of creating Google or something. It was an article in Quartz, and it said how the NSA created Google, something like that. And they talked about the idea was to find birds of a feather. And I think they said in that article that a search was much more valuable for understanding your psyche than Facebook. And that's like, I always think of that like an artist and a critic. An artist is not the right person to criticize his own work. A critic is so Facebook is you presenting what you think of yourself as, which isn't who you are, but your searches are who you are. And they were saying Google's idea is to compile that information, which is why they're the biggest database, which is why now I think like the anti-monopolists can go after them because they've already got what they need and they're going to move on to AI from just searches. Then they construct your bird group, your birds of a feather group, which doesn't exist at all. And then they can really marginalize you. And that dovetailed with another thing I read about creating dysfunction. It was a government document creating dysfunctional subcultures to undermine the political
Is that a Cass Sunstein paper?
Oh, I have to talk to you about that. No, but it's like something like that. And they said, this is how you undermine the political stability of an enemy country. But of course, we're the enemy country. No. Did I not tell you this? Because I haven't heard you mention it. Do you know who co-wrote that paper with Cass Sunstein? Do you remember?
I do, and I don't
You
have the
do.
name at the tip of my
If
tongue.
you saw the name, you would remember because it's such an unusual name and it's hard to spell. Adrian Vermeule.
Okay.
All right. So if you saw a picture, like, oh yeah, I remember that because I remember thinking, who the hell's this guy?
Yeah.
I stumbled upon his name going down another rabbit hole, and I was like, I know that name. I know that weird ass name. He is the lead in Wikipedia. If you look up his name, he's a Harvard professor who initiated the Catholic integralist movement in the United States, which wants the US government, the United States, which is not a majority Catholic country, for their laws to be informed by Catholic doctrine. I mean, I can understand that in the Philippines, but it's crazy here. And this, my friend, is the guy who invented cognitive infiltration. And so if you ever had to wonder about the Christian white nationalist thing, just look that. It's probably gone by now. That's happened to me before where I'll say that and then they'll like rewrite the thing. It's weird.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's crazy. That's wild.
crazy. So that was to me proof positive, like, because I look at this stuff, I look at the post-libertarian Nazi thing, and I'm like,
Yeah.
look, the mixing that stuff up makes it impossible to focus the attention on the atrocities in Gaza right now. And Netanyahu, I'm sure there's 1,000 quotes of him and his cohorts talking about exploiting anti-Semitism as a shield. I mean, it's just a crazy, like, I just feel like it's such a psyop, that whole thing. And when I saw his name in a leadership role of that, I mean, although I'm not saying the Catholic integralists are Nazis, I'm not saying that. I'm lumping it all together, but I'm just saying there was this thing where libertarians, a lot of libertarians migrated to other post-libertarian ideas, everything from historical revisionism of World War II, of which I am, a proponent. I think history is fake, like you said, and we should, and it's cartoonish. It's cartoonish, which is not realistic. It doesn't happen that way. So anyway, I'm not going to rant.
No, it did. What I guess what mainstream history texts are bedtime stories for adults to make you feel better about either where you're living or how you're living. And the more you get into not even alternative history, but accurate or more accurate history, it becomes more of an unwinding of all of that previous programming. The view count thing is crazy. When I had YouTube channels, I would watch my numbers go down.
Yeah.
I'd be removing views. That's happened to me a number of times on Rumble too, by the way.
No, it's so funny.
And yeah, I think view counts are something that can be bought. Followers are something that can be bought. If you have the resources to do it, you can make yourself an overnight sensation, especially if you work in coordination with some of these groups, not dissimilar to Tenant Media, but there's a lot of them out
Tell
there.
me about that. I know nothing about those people, that organization, what happened. Can you give me the AM wake up, summary?
Sure. So Lauren Chin and her husband formed this group called Tenant Media, and it was basically an aggregate. They weren't, they weren't actually doing the content. They were purchasing the content from people who had already recorded it and put it out. They were given an infusion of $10 million over the course of, I think, 8 months by 2 RT employees. And it was directly for the purchase of Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, Lauren Southern, a couple other people to redistribute their content. They created a fake CEO. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it's something pretty funny and foreign sounding. They put up a LinkedIn profile for this fella, and then another white sheet that basically broke down who the fake guy was. There was a picture of him sitting in a private jet. And
That's clever. I like it.
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
just think that's funny.
it's a nice little operation. It is. But I mean, Benny Johnson was getting $400,000 an episode.
But that's
$400,000.
how is that
Tim
even
Pool,
possible? How could that revenue get generated? Are they
it
saying that the
was,
Russian government gave them millions of dollars so that they could pay them? Because I just understand how ads work, and that's not. I mean, that's
yeah,
not happening.
no, the allegation is, yes, a Kremlin-backed group, because that's how they have
It
to
doesn't
couch
have to
it.
be Kremlin backed. I mean, my position is that that's somebody supporting them. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
Kremlin.
But there was $10 million was given to Tenet Media to pay for this content. And so they bought it. On its face, it doesn't look like they were specifically doing pro-Russia content. You know what I mean?
Well,
But
I mean, just non-interventionism is pro-Russia.
yeah, at this
I
point,
mean,
the First Amendment is,
yeah,
Russian
because we're
disinformation.
wrong in Ukraine. We are wrong.
Yes.
We are morally wrong. So anybody who says that obviously is doing something that benefits the other side of that equation. They do morally wrong things too. Wasn't Chechnya like an abomination? I can't remember which one.
Yeah. And everything that they've done in Georgia has been an abomination.
Yes,
Everything that
right.
they did
Mhm.
in and to Belarus, to say nothing of the fact that there's been a huge crackdown on political dissidents inside of the Russian state over
Yeah,
the
I want
last
to
10
talk.
or 15
I
years.
want to talk about that too.
And then Russia is also 100% on board with the biometric ID,
Yes,
the CBDCs.
yes, yes,
They just spent, we did this story
yes.
this week. They just spent $646 million of their well, the equivalent is like 59 billion rubles
Yeah,
that they put into blocking VPN access
yeah.
inside of the state of Russia.
Yeah, I mean, and that because they have the moral high road in some places, because we have the moral low road, there, of course, it is in their interest, propaganda-wise, to focus the world's attention on the places where they have the high ground. So it's my position that when in right and wrong, good and evil, like heroes and villains, it's just what your interests are at the time. And sometimes it's on the right side and sometimes it's on the wrong side. That doesn't mean you're a good guy or a bad guy. Well,
Right.
it does mean like that you're a bad guy when you're on the wrong side if you're pragmatically and mercenarily going for your own interests. But yes, I don't think they're heroes. However, I'm not going to say that we didn't conduct a coup against Ukraine, because we did, and we disenfranchised all those Russian speakers, and he should have rescued them a lot sooner.
Yeah, and the people in the Donbass area specifically were
Oh,
begging the
I
Russian government
know.
for
Like
a
Crimea.
decade.
And
Yes,
Crimea, they had an interest in it. So they were like, well, can't let Crimea go. Our ships are there. It's San Diego, for crying out loud.
it is.
Yeah,
It is.
but the other ones, no, I know, and they were dying. But so you're saying they're blocking VPNs and stuff. If I go back to my childhood, I remember being taught all about free speech. My parents were very kind of libertarian, all of that. It was absolutist, in my opinion, absolutist about property rights, gun rights, everything. But my father was not against McCarthyism, as they call it, or like
Okay.
the no, it was the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA. Here was the thing. So they said that they were an independent body, but they were actually a literal like extension of the Kremlin. And my argument to my father, who would suppress that entity and make it illegal or whatever, which was the only time I ever heard him against anything, I would say, even if it is an arm of a foreign government, let let your libertarian truth stand on its own feet. But then, I get a little. I have to give some. I have to revisit the idea of a nation, of a state, of a people, of how easily manipulated we are, about the power of propaganda. I mean, so I'm wondering what your position is on any of that. What's your
I
reaction to my saying that?
so I'm anti-state in general. I think that no matter what the state it represents itself as it's an illegitimate entity that only exists through coercion, theft, violence, kidnapping, and extortion. And so it doesn't matter. I've always said this for years. I don't care what shape or color of the hat on the authoritarian is. I am anti-authoritarian, and I don't recognize the legitimacy of any of these clowns because none of them speak for anyone other than outside of their own interests, and their own interest is always the perpetuation of the entity that is doing the extortion and theft and coercion. And it's just this wheel of shit that everyone has to get ran over by. And I guarantee you it doesn't have to be this way. I guarantee you it doesn't. You know, there have been a number of societies that have existed that have allowed for arbitration and recompense without the formal organization of a state authority to remove people from their homes, remove them from their finances. You know, so it really doesn't have to be this way. But the oversaturation of a false binary has proliferated throughout modernity, and we're only always ever, so you know this because of all of the Ron Paul stuff, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm hardcore libertarian. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so that false binary narrative that has prevailed throughout modern society is something that is specifically designed to limit our thinking. It's specifically designed to give us, as Carlin called it, the illusion of choice. And then we're left, you know, we're supposed to be left to defend either side of the lesser of two evils coin. And I think everybody that watches your show recognizes that, you know, even if you're quote unquote voting for the lesser of two evils, you're consistently voting for evil.
Yes, but there is a long-term view and a less long-term view. And the turning point for Murray Rothbard was when the Iron Curtain fell, and I think it was the Russians were using immigration as a weapon against some of these newly freed states. And he said, now I understand there's a real problem, because when they weaponize immigration, you don't really have time to wait for people to understand that if only you stopped manipulating the migrations of people, or stopped giving welfare, or stopped all of these things. If when people realize what a mistake it is to facilitate inorganic things like this, it'll be too late. And I'm just saying, like, at a certain point, I have to say they are weaponizing immigration. We have this problem here.
Oh, yeah.
I know you recognize. What should you do about it? What should we do? Do you have a policy prescription, which I stay away from because I don't believe in government, just like you. I'm like, I don't believe in it. What are you supposed to do? They're not and even any policy they came up with would be the left or the right's, self-serving lie. But
yeah.
What
you have to you have to starve the beast and make them eat each other. And the best way to do that is through counter economics. The
agorism.
Yeah, well, yeah. But if we stop playing with their monopoly money and we start playing with ours, they're going to be forced to eat themselves.
I would say you can't. That I agree with the solution, but I don't think it's. I think that's just self-preservation, and I think actually I would say you're right. That's all you can do. I don't think it's going to bring them down, but I think it might save you and your descendants and us together.
You can do more. And Václav Havel wrote out the prescription for it in Power for the Powerless, and creating parallel systems and creating these sort of parallel societies in conjunction with counter economics is a prescription for victory. But you have to be aligned in your community
to the point to where a majority of them are on board with it. There's a handful of different ways that you can do this. And for the people who still believe in voting, one of the most important things you could ever possibly do is take control of your local sheriff's department, because that's where the enforcement mechanisms are levied onto the people who are outside of the major, major population centers. Police departments are a separate entity, and that's something that, we could talk about another time. But if you can control your sheriff's department, then you can control your city council. You can control your city council, then you can allocate what goes where for what enforcement mechanisms through local police, and you have the opportunity to say no to the outside corporate interests that have completely bought up every single city council on the planet.
Yeah.
And you have the opportunity, at least in a way that we never have before, in order to quite literally take our towns back. But you have to have a community that supports that effort, which means you have to make an intentional community at this point.
Yeah, and actually, Rosa Quarry was one person who was was really galvanizing people against Agenda 21, and she had been like a land planner for the city, and she just saw these policies, what they were there for. And she said people were really coming to those city council meetings, and I believe it. And they stopped coming when Trump got elected. They were like, this is going to be all taken care of. And now she died, did one of those 60-0 in 3 seconds deaths. I think it was a turbo cancer right at the beginning of COVID. Yeah. But yeah, so I hear you. I also feel a little, demoralized when I think of how, when you do get the grassroots going, that can be infiltrated. But you're saying not if you start with an intentional society. You're not trying to take back something that's too big.
Also, I the people that were showing up to city council meetings were doing that before they had secured their sheriff's department. And if you have because that was something that is the people that are going to be there to remove you, if you make it an intentional effort to put them on your side in the first place, or if you install your own people into those, they have right of refusal. And they can go, no, counselor, I'm not going to do that. Right. No, as a matter of fact, we need you to sit here and answer these questions. No, open your books. Let's see where your money is coming from, and let's see how you're robbing us.
So do you still engage in any activism? Like in real life, because I consider what you do quite impactful, but
so what I'm doing now is something called the Third Eye Carnival, and it was something that we talked about on your show a couple of years ago. Yeah. So it's now in LLC, and there's going to be 4 of them next year minimum.
Wow.
The goal is 40 to 50 weekends a year within 5 years. There will be a Third Eye Carnival in a city. And I've got a couple of people on board that are all for this vision, and we're trying to put it together. But what effectively we're doing is combining an art form with real conversations under the umbrella of getting people together in 3 dimensions to interact with each other, figure out that you're not alone. It's not just you. You're not the crazy person in your family. You may be surrounded by crazy people.
Right.
But I think that because both, art and speech are the most effective methods of propaganda delivery systems on the planet. If we're not doing our own propaganda for freedom, if we're not doing that kind of, then we've missed the point entirely. And if you can't implement these ideas and allow them to grow and proliferate through in my opinion, the best possible methods to do it, which are, music and, artwork and comedy and even food, because cooking is an art form.
Mm-hmm.
It is. And I really want to do a Third Eye Cooking Carnival. I really do. We've got the Beef Initiative and Texas Slim on board with this. We've got a bunch of local ranchers and producers all over the country that are dedicated to seeing something like this come to fruition.
Wow. And Greener Pastures, my friends Chad and Lanny, they do preserving today. They're trying to rejuvenate a family farm from way back in the day. Maybe they could contribute.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. And yeah, let's have that conversation off air at some point, because I would love to reach out to them. And
oh, you should. Have you never spoken to them? You might as well just speak to them sometime. They have sub podcasts, and so I'll let you know off air.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I'd like to connect them with Slim and the Beef Initiative too, because if nothing else, it'll get their information out on an international database of local ranchers and producers that aren't throwing their cattle full of mRNA or anything else.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. But so that's I guess under the umbrella of activism. The
definitely. Yeah, I was wondering if you do any like actual go to your city council meetings, which I was going to do. And then someone told me, even though you live in like this little tiny town, it's in LA County. You're not going to make any, shouldn't even bother having a council. I might check out one, but I was a little demoralized by that.
I try to, as often as possible, locate myself in tiny ass redneck towns.
Yeah, where you don't have to worry about it.
Or you do get the opportunity to show up. Like I've gone to school board meetings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm as active in my kids' charter school as I could possibly be. Which, by the way, when I went to orientation for my youngest son's school, the principal said, okay, well, there's a couple of problems from last year that I want to address right now. And I almost didn't think I was going to come back here, but I prayed on it. And I, did this, and it's not a Christian school.
Yeah. Wow.
And she was
she didn't get fired for saying that to you privately?
No, upfront about, her decision-making process from jump, and then went on to say, we are never going to mask your children.
Wow.
We believe in smiles. It doesn't matter what the state says. We'll risk losing our charter because we've got donors that are going to privately fund this institution in perpetuity. So we can buck that. And this is in California, but it's in gold country. And then she said, you don't have to have the mRNA treatment. She called it a treatment, not a vaccine. You don't have to have the treatment in order to attend here. And it's a very, very, I hate the phrase interactive community, but it is. And they really do make you feel like they want your input. They want you to, which is something every parent should do anyway, but really be a part of your kid's school system, not just their education, but the school that they go to. Because their education is going to continue outside of school, but they want you involved with the school because they feel like that's a critical component of their ability to keep teaching kids. And so I'm thrilled beyond belief that my son got fired from public school. He did. They called me and they called his mom, and they were like, look, man, your kid's too smart to be here. He's going to get bored. He's going to start becoming a problem. Why don't you get him out of here? And why don't you get him somewhere to where he's going to be able to thrive? And we went, okay.
Yeah. And you did? And are you comfortable with the new, is that the same son? I thought the younger son was the praying principal, right? And this is the older son?
No. Same kid.
Oh, okay.
Same kid. Yeah. Okay. My oldest son did graduate from public school. It's because he wanted to be a part of sports. He was doing track and tennis and a couple other things. But again, it was
heads on straight, they can do it. So I mean, I observed that myself and for my own self. Like I got through public school.
Oh, me too. And at 16 years old, when he came to stay with me for the summer, he was producing AM Wake Up. He was, pulling up all the clips.
That's great.
He got to sit in on all of these interviews. And to frightening me, Slim is usually in like twice a month. You know, when he had a little bit more time on his hands, he was there every week. He's a lot busier now, which is fortunate. That's a good thing. Busy Slim is a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he'll be on tomorrow. He's, you know, if he's on, it's on a Thursday. It's usually twice a month now. They're fascinating conversations. You should have him on.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
He has got an immense knowledge base of not just the ranching industry, but all of the laws surrounding it.
Oh, why don't you connect us? You know, if you remember to send me
I'm
an
happy
email
to do
offline,
that.
that would be love it.
Happy to do that. Go ahead.
So let's I don't want to keep you any longer. You're like the hardest working guy in podcasting. So I just want to make sure. I think we covered actually a lot of the different things that you're involved in. And I'm ending this conversation like even more impressed than I started, because not only are you mastering all these ideas, putting them all together, sharing them with all of us, but you have all these other things that you're doing, from the Third Eye Carnival to making sure that your kids are an asset and not a net deficit to society, which I realize how hard that is. That's a full-time job for me anyway. So I do, but if you could tell people, not that anybody listening doesn't already know, but because I have reposted our conversations on your shows, but what's the best way for people to find you? And if they haven't heard of your shows before, where's the best place do you think they should start sampling your work?
Go to the website, amwakeupshow.com. It's got links to pretty much everything that I'm involved in. I got to update it now that I'm a part of the debate network. But yeah, amwakeupshow.com. That streams live Monday through Thursday from 7 to 10 Pacific. The show that I've been doing the longest is Slow News Day. That's every Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And then I do Blunt Force Wisdom on Monday nights. Oh, dude, it's so much fun. It's so much fun. Funny. It really is just a complete departure from absolutely everything that we normally talk about. Sometimes there's overlap because we went on one of my co-hosts is Haitian. So that's
fun. Yeah.
We kind of broke down some of the more insidious allegations.
They're not eating the cats, they're sacrificing them. Is that
well, she's a lesbian, so she does eat the cat every now and then. She does. But
oh boy, you probably got a lot of mileage out of that one.
It's great.
My gosh.
But yeah, no, Teal's got a great sense of humor too. But it's been, it started out as kind of like a dissection of popular culture and dating, because we were all single at the time, and it's evolved into or devolved into debate, depending on how you look at it. But basically, we do make fun of the more hilarious aspects of popular culture. We get high as giraffe pussy and just tackle all of these different issues. And then deliberating dog-faced dudes, which you can find on YouTube. My good friend and brother Ben Balderson dragged me into this, and that's also co-hosted by Alan Marcus and John Rowland, who I can't believe I never met because he lives in Santa Cruz and he's a natural rights guy. Very, very fun time. And again, I shied away from the whole debate thing for a while, because I thought it was two idiots screaming at each other in increasingly high-pitched voices until one of them rage quit. That's not what we're doing. So that's fun. We're both on Union of the Unwanted frequently, and then I carry a whole bunch of other shows on the AM Wake Up channel.
Right.
And so tonight, for example, there's a show called Poppy's Field Project, which is deep dives into esoteric astrology and stuff like that. That's so far out of the scope of my understanding. I always thought that astrology was metaphysical racism. I'm going to die on that hill.
But you stream from the website? So you stream
no, that's on the Rockfin and Rumble channels. Those shows go out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the Rockfin and Rumble channels are AM Wake Up, right?
Yes, and then we carry for like we also carry America Unplugged, which is Billy Ray
Yes,
Valentine's
I
show
enjoyed
with
Youre.
Tony
Is that at
Arterburn.
rockman.com/AM Wake Up? Even if
Yeah,
it's AM Wake Up show, people
yeah.
will find it
No, it's
easily
AM
enough.
Wake Up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of shows that we carry. I kind of effed around and created a half-ass network.
That's fine.
Eventually, I would like to get to the point to where we could have a server to do this so that we could be a little bit more independent. I am growing increasingly frustrated with Rockfin and Rumble.
Ask Graham
Yeah,
of Grimerica. He helped me
yeah.
with that, which
And
I squander because I don't really use it, but I have it.
yeah, no, and Graham's fantastic, man.
Yeah,
He really
very
is.
helpful.
But yeah, there's content streaming out at least twice a day, 6 days a week. And the only time that we don't have content up at least twice a day is on Thursday because that's my girlfriend's Friday, so I'm gonna take her out.
Perfect.
Yeah, but yeah.
So
trying to avoid setting up anything and wake up.
yeah,
They got a bad track record.
Gonna have 37 children. That was terrible. I can't even joke about Wake Up or Ruby Ridge. Terrible.
That was one of my biggest in conjunction with everything that I'd been experiencing during that particular time in the 90s. That was one of the things that made me truly look at government as a malevolent force. And then my co-host over on the debate show, Ben Balderson, he had a relative that was at Ruby Ridge.
Really?
Yeah.
On which side? Because there weren't too many people in the shooting gallery.
Yeah, he did on our side, not on the FBI side.
Wow. I mean, I don't even understand how there were so few people in there. It was such a sick, thing. Ugh, I don't even get into that. It's so upsetting. But yeah, that'll be an eye opener. That's for sure. That'll be a third eye opener, an eyeballs opener. Everything is there to see. When I was on Tripoli recently, he named the episode Black Mass Trauma Event because that's why I think of these things, 9/11 stuff. It's just like it's a black mass ritual. It's a mass trauma event. And like these school shootings and everything, they're really like these guys have got their pathological psychology down, which they've been working on for so many decades.
It's intergenerational bloodline death cult that operates on mass trauma events, and that's how they get most of the population.
But they don't have total control, or they wouldn't have to put constant energy and resources just to bat back. Think of what we're talking about. Not only do they have the entire mainstream media and the entire side stream media, but they have, I'm going to say, the majority of the alt media.
Yeah.
And that's all just to fight us, this community right here. I'm not just talking about like you and me. I'm talking about all these people in the chat, all these people who are listening. They're like maintaining their mental health with the help of community and not falling for that stuff. And it's very, for me, just keep your head. The fact that they have to put so much energy into it, to me, is the white pill.
It's
just a never ending. Our job is to kick the can of tyranny forever. Their job is to try to tyrannize us. And we're still holding our own. The rounds continue to ding off like we're keeping going. So I don't like to end on a negative note. So
no. The black pill's a psyop that I'm trying to formulate a better way to communicate the whole pill thing, because I think that's incredibly restrictive and limiting and kind of but
hope. Well, here's the thing. Hope. Despair is one of the unforgivable sins. Like you have to have hope. It's a sin not to have hope. It's literally like in the Catholic Church, a sin not to have hope. You must have it. So the black pill is a sin.
And despair in and of itself is more damaging to you than any drug. It's more damaging to you.
That's why they call it an unforgivable sin, because not because there's any sin God won't forgive, but because you can't even ask forgiveness. You can't even find your way out of that paper bag, because by definition, de facto impossible.
Yeah, the black pill stuff is designed deliberately and put out there with actors that seem authentic in order to lock you into stasis. And
yes. That was one thing I do highly recommend people listen to episode 766 of Tinfoil Hats, where you did get into that stuff. Even if you're listening to somebody who's tells you nothing but the truth, if it's all darkness, if it's all hopelessness, if it wastes a lot of time, if they tell you to go down I don't know where you're on this, but like I can't do a lot of the number stuff and Tartaria and all. I'm just not spending my time doing that. I'm not finding the answer, and it's not gonna protect me in any way from the kicking that can of tyranny. It's not gonna help that.
That should be looked at as entertainment. If you want to wild out,
hobby,
yeah. You want to wild out on some World's Fair stuff, man, go ahead. You want to wild out on some Tartary? If you have the luxury and the free time to do that, please do that, because it is fascinating.
Yes.
But I don't need to dedicate my life to that to know that my government lies to me.
Yes, exactly.
And I feel the exact same way about FE. I don't know that you were on YouTube. I don't know if you can say,
I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm telling you, I really don't know. I do not listen to much.
Yeah. Well, I Flat Earth. I feel the exact same way about the Flat Earth thing. Yeah. I don't need
I don't care who
I don't need to prove the shape of the earth to know that my government lies to me.
I've seen it. I've seen the shape of the earth. I was in the Concorde once. I saw it.
Oh, cool.
It's round.
Well, you also saw it through, concave windows.
Okay, that's true. But I also flew east from New York to Indonesia because I had a business trip. And then I flew east from Indonesia back to New York. So yeah, okay, maybe. Mm-hmm. But another argument, somebody called into my show and said he was in the Navy. And when you drop behind the horizon to hide from the ship that you're about to torpedo, you have to, or whatever, shoot a missile, you have to account for the curvature of the earth. So what the Flat Earth say is it's kind of curved. It's just not a globe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and look,
but we're not figuring it out, and it doesn't matter.
I would like to think that Terry Pratchett was right, that it's a flat disc that sits on top of 4 elephants that stand on the world turtle that's swimming through space. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
So good.
I always encourage people to dump their brain out at night so that you don't have to.
That. It's so fun.
The Discworld series is one of my favorites. It really is.
So good. So fun.
Yeah, so right. I think it's the world turtle.
Well,
I do.
Let's go do something fun then. And it's such a joy to hang out with you. And I'm so surprised that I just spent the first 45 minutes picking your brain about you. It's literally, I have 2 pages of notes and questions, and that was the last one I was going to ask. So, however, I never heard that stuff. And yes, if people listen to you night and day, they're going to pick all this stuff up, but I don't know it all. And I think people would love to hear about somebody, the journey people take to get to where they're, providing you insights. And it also gives you some ethos in that people understand that you're coming from a place of knowledge and wisdom at where your perspective is generated. So I really enjoyed that. And I hope you didn't mind, because I kind of threw that at you without any warning, I think. But
yeah, no, I hate that shit, but I'm happy to do it.
Are you serious? You hate talking about yourself? Is that the fact?
I hate talking about me.
Oh my gosh. Well, good thing I didn't ask. That would have been terrible if I had asked. See, that makes it such a more valuable thing. Well, thank you. Don't hate me. I'm sorry. It was
no, I don't. You're one of my favorite people. You're one of the people I respect most in whatever it is we're doing.
Very kind, but I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. You are the hardest working man in podcasting. Thank you, Steve. And if you would just hang on just a sec as I wrap this up, because I need your local download. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. That was the great Steve Poikonen from AM Wake Up and so much more, but you can find it all at amwakeupshow.com. And I, of course, am your host, Monica Press. Thanks very much, and we will see you next time.